Well, good evening, and I'm obliged to start by thanking Gene for a very tough opponent, but also assigning me the very easy side of the debate question before us. The fact is, the bottom of the national policy dumpster, as I call it, is already in plain sight, and the two UniParty candidates will surely complete the remaining descent with equal alacrity. Lower it? Okay. Now you got it? All right. That's because neither Trump nor Harris will do a damn thing about the three overwhelming threats to capitalist prosperity and constitutional liberty in America. Number one, the exploding public debt. Number two, our rogue central bank that both enables the Washington spenders and fattens the brokerage accounts of the top 1% while punishing the fast-shrinking middle class with persistent inflation. And number three, Washington's failing global empire that is bleeding the U.S. Treasury dry, even as it pushes the world to the brink of nuclear war. So let's start with the skyrocketing public debt. Now, it was $1 trillion when I became budget director, and that wasn't exactly ancient history, because as you can see, I'm still here. And quite vertical, as a matter of fact. Debt was then $20 trillion when Trump arrived at the Oval Office, who wasted no time adding another $8 trillion or more in 4 years than the first 43 presidents racked up during the first 216 years of the Republic. Next, it will be $36 trillion when Sleepy Joe finishes his own $8 trillion add-on, proving that his is as big as the Donald's when it comes to the fiscal violation of the nation's taxpayers. And from there, it's off to the races. Baked-in UniParty tax and spending policies will add still another $25 trillion over the next decade. But rather than attacking Washington's doomsday borrowing machine, the Donald wants to layer on $8 trillion more of debt to increase the hideously bloated defense budget by 25%, allegedly to make up for inflation, give free IVF treatments to all Americans, including apparently the childless cat ladies, extend the unpaid-for 2017 tax cuts at a cost of $5 trillion over a decade, and exempt tips and Social Security and overtime from taxes entirely, and corporate income mostly, or at least down to 15%. Now, don't get me wrong, I am all for minimizing taxes, but you've got to earn the right to reduce taxes by cutting spending by an amount equal to at least 85% of the revenue loss. That's because under today's lowish marginal rates, fully 96% of tax filers, accounting for 75% of the $10 trillion in annual taxable compensation, are in the bottom four brackets between 10 and 24%. Now down there, a couple of points of marginal rates, either up or down, has no meaningful impact on work, output, investment, and income. So even according to the very conservative Tax Foundation, you only get a 15% revenue flowback from each dollar of the Trump tax cuts. Indeed, on the $1.8 trillion cost of exempting Social Security from federal income taxes completely, there would be no reflow at all. These folks are already non-working retirees and are unlikely to take leave of their golf courses in Florida or their nursing homes up north, as the case may be, to take a greeter's job at Walmart's. Kamala's just as bad, of course, with at least $3 trillion of new free stuff. That includes a $25,000 door prize for each and every one of the nation's 1.7 million first-time homebuyers each year, and also bigger subsidies for Obamacare and the EITC and child credits, and $6,000 to buy bassinets, bottles, and bonnets for each of America's 3.6 million newborn babies annually. So the UniParty has now locked in place plus all the new free stuff being peddled by Trump and Harris, it will take the public debt to $65 trillion in the early 2030s, and according to CBO's latest rosy scenario forecast, it will reach 166% of GDP by mid-century. Of course, by 2050, the debt will actually be a lot bigger than 166% of GDP, because CBO's rosy scenario assumes there won't be a recession or any other economic emergency, inflation flare-up, or interest rate surge during the entirety of the next 25 years. And if you believe that, I know a broker of Florida swampland that I can put you in touch with right away. Still, the reason CBO's 2050 debt figure is expressed as a kind of antiseptic percentage of GDP rather than the whole number is that even the ultra-optimistic projection would literally terrify the voters. What no one in Washington will say out loud is that in round greenback dollars and cents, the CBO says the public debt will hit $150 trillion by mid-century. Perhaps that number sounds a tad large, and it should, because it amounts to 1.5 times the current GDP of the entire planet. Yet that's the inexorable and minimum possible result of the UniParty's pact with the fiscal devil, which both the Donald and the Cackler have signed on to lock, stock, and barrel. Of course, the correct way to tackle the impending tsunami of red ink is by shrinking the $85 billion spending baseline, especially when you only have $55 trillion of baseline revenue under current law and the Donald's great big free lunch tax cuts. But not by the lights of the UniParty consensus with respect to the four dominant components amounting to 91% of the budget. Of these, both Trump and Harris say no cuts, as in nothing, nix, nada, nugatory, and yet. The first component is what we call the big welfare state of Social Security and Medicare, which alone will cost $36 trillion in the next decade, or 42% of the total spending. Yet the Trumpified GOP wing of the UniParty says it won't touch a dime of Social Security or Medicare, despite the fact that average workers get back 2 to 3 times more in benefits than the present value of the taxes they paid in. The second spending basket is the little welfare state of Medicaid, Obamacare, food stamps, and other means-tested benefits, which will cost $13 trillion over the next decade, but in constant 2024 dollars, those programs had already reached $940 billion per year in December 2016, when Obama skedaddled the White House for a more commodious dwelling on Martha's Vineyard. And it was up by 8% more in constant dollars when the Donald shuffled off to Mar-a-Lago, clutching a file of New York Times clippings that some deep state operative had classified as top secret. And in the not a dime's worth of difference modality, we will have grown by roughly the same amount, 10% in constant dollars, when next January they usher out Sleepy Joe in a wheelchair or on a gurney, as the case may be. So the Donald couldn't even best the Biden-Harris crew when it comes to curtailing free stuff to poor people. Thirdly, we have the baseline warfare state budget, including defense, foreign ops, and veterans, which will cost $15 trillion over the decade. But the Donald wants 25% more, and Kamala brags about all the lethal weapons she intends to deploy against any and all nations who give any gaffe to the neocons who might be placed in her cabinet by her new best friend, Dick Cheney. Finally, there is another $13 trillion owing to net interest on the public debt. And the latter assumes that notwithstanding this torrent of spending and borrowing, the weighted average yield on the federal debt will be just 3% over the next decade, and there's a fat chance of that. As it happens, therefore, these four buckets add up to $77 trillion under UniParty policy in the next decade, or the aforementioned 91% of CBO's baseline spending. But if the UniParty candidates stand for zero savings, don't be fooled by Trump's promise to put Elon Musk in charge of a waste and fraud commission. Now, Musk is surely a brilliant businessman, but that is no qualification whatsoever for staunching Washington's torrents of red ink. That's because the federal government is not a business in any way, shape, or form, and fraud, waste, and abuse have virtually nothing to do with the soaring national debt. To the contrary, as we have seen, Washington operates a giant free stuff club that includes the households of more than 150 million Americans. But in the immortal words of comedian George Carlin, the fact that you are here tonight means you ain't in it, as he said it. In any event, when you set aside war, welfare, and mandatory interest expense from the $85 trillion of baseline spending over the next decade, you have only $8 trillion left for the entirety of domestic programs and bureaucracies. This includes the National Park Service, NIH Health Research, the Air Traffic Control System, farm subsidies, highways, the FBI, the DEA, the DOJ, the Patent Office, NASA, and the entirety of the Departments of Education, Interior, Labor, Energy, and much more like and similar expense. So even if the Donald Musk Commission comes up with 25% efficiency savings in all these departments and activities, it would lower the public debt from $65 trillion to, $63 trillion by 2034. A big deal, it's actually not. On the other hand, Musk doesn't have a snowball's chance in the hot place of penetrating the military-industrial congressional complex. And the problem with entitlements is not fraud, but the fact that trillions of benefits provided by statute cannot be stopped unless Congress changes the laws. For instance, Social Security alone will cost $20 trillion over the next decade, but the administrative overhead is less than a penny per dollar. And the only serious fraudulent enrollments that have ever been ballyhooed is that dead people are allegedly not kicked off the rolls fast enough. In fact, President Reagan kept telling me that this was surely a gusher of waste, but it never checked out because the rolls are actually pruned quite quickly upon the filing of death certificates, including recoupment of payments made during the month of death from the decedent's family. For crying out loud, they don't even prorate for the days people were still above ground, just in case your loved ones don't already know about that. As it happens, about 2.7 million Social Security recipients depart for the great beyond annually, and their average benefit is about $1,700 a month. So catching them within 5 days after the body has gone cold would save about $3.8 billion per year, or 0.2% of current Social Security outlays. With respect to the warfare state, even Elon Musk wouldn't find much to reduce from the $15 trillion for national security. That's because it's driven by hegemonic missions around the globe, not simply weapon systems that are too expensive in what amounts to a bespoke market controlled by military contractors and the legislators they bankroll. In short, to save anything material from the $15 trillion warfare state baseline, you have to bring the empire home. That means canceling current missions such as protecting the sandbars in the South China Sea, or the shipping lanes in the Red Sea and the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea and a lot of other seas. And it also means revoking the right of small-time politicians like Marcos Jr. in the Philippines and the Russia bashers in the Baltics to poke their neighbors in the eye behind the shield of Washington's security guarantees, all of which are now Cold War relics having nothing to do with legitimate homeland security. Finally, the Federal Reserve is completely in the tank for the UniParty. It has been the great enabler of the soaring public debt because it has monetized trillions of treasury paper, even as its ridiculously low interest rates have fueled immense financial bubbles. Harris, in particular, keeps yammering about her abiding commitment to the regular working folks of America, but has never once mentioned the depredations of the nation's rogue central bank. That is to say, the bicoastal billionaires are laughing all the way to the Democrat Uber Donors Club, even as the pinch-hitting marionette they have stood up to replace Joe Biden probably couldn't find the Eccles building in a self-driving car. The fact is, the UniParty has more or less been in power since 1988, when the Gipper rode off into the sunset with his work still far from done, and upon perhaps inadvertently saddling the nation with the horror of Alan Greenspan at the Fed, where its balance sheet has exploded from $300 billion to $7.5 trillion. That 25 times gain amounts to 5 orders of magnitude more than the growth of national income in the same period. And yet, Donald Trump spent his entire term in the Oval Office castigating the Fed for not printing even more fiat credits, and once went so far as to demand zero interest rates so that the U.S. would have even lower rates than imposed by the wackadoos at the Central Bank of Japan. At the end of the day, the number 1, the number 2, and the number 3 priority in America is bringing the utterly out of control money printing machine at the Fed to heel. But the GOP, the once and former party of sound money and the gold standard, has been taken over by a monetary policy ignoramus. Based on his utterances that Donald would give Congressman Wright Patman, Senator Huey Long, and William Jennings Bryan himself a run for the title of economic crackpot of the century. So the bottom line is simple. We are heading to the bottom of the policy dumpster no matter which of the UniParty candidates wins. The silver lining, however, is that both the Donald and the cackler have a good chance of producing 4 years of such unrelenting disaster for the American people as to finally cause them to abandon both wings of the UniParty. And fortunately, there is now waiting to emerge from the ashes a new Reclaim America party, led by Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, Nicole Shanahan, Vivek Ramaswamy, Rand Paul, and hopefully many of you. It may well be, in fact, that in the midst of this very dark election, the warmongers, the spenders, and the statists will finally be given their walking papers, and none too soon. Thank you.